European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has announced a deal to produce drones in collaboration with Ukraine. She said the EU could offer advantages to Ukraine, including broad industrial capacity and secure production sites. Von der Leyen arrived in Kyiv for Ukraine's annual Statehood Day celebrations, which she marked with President Volodymyr Zelensky. She also pledged to continue military and financial support as Ukraine defends against Russia's four-year invasion. Ukraine's innovation use of drones has inflicted heavy losses on Russian forces and damaged much of Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. Here's von der Leyen announcing the drone deal in Kyiv.
This deal will bring together Ukrainian ingenuity and Europe's industrial scale. And with this deal, our message is clear. Now is the time to invest in Ukraine, because this means to invest in Europe and to invest in our common security and our common future.
And DW's Kyiv correspondent Nick Connolly told me before what difference this drone deal might make for Ukraine's defense.
I think it's certainly very welcome, and this is all about getting Ukrainian know-how and sharing it with the whole of the EU, not just individual member states that have already got these drone deals. I'm not sure it's actually going to make the biggest difference because simply the countries that care most about protecting themselves from Russian drones, countries in Northern Europe along Russia's borders, also in Eastern Europe, they, for the most part, already have these deals. And it has to be said that in Europe, the big investments in military tech are all still on a kind of national level. You have these national champions for all the attempts to try and pool resources. There is still competition between member states trying to make sure that their home industries are the ones that first pick up on this Ukrainian know-how and come up with the solutions of the future. So there is a bit of kind of skepticism here when you talk to experts about what this deal will do. Obviously, it's a sign of goodwill. It's also nice for Volodymyr Zelensky as the host to be asked for help and not just to ask for support from Europe. But I think the really big thing that the EU has done for Ukraine in the last few months were those 90 billion euros loan that basically give this country financial stability for 2 whole years. And it means that the government can actually think about winning this war rather than just trying to survive from month to month, trying to ask different countries to provide finances, to pay wages, pay pensions and keep the kind of state machine rolling.
So drones, loans, you know, apart from those things, did von der Leyen have more good news for Zelensky?
Well, certainly when it comes to Ukraine's ambitions to join the EU, there was a lot of kind of silence and a lot less than was expected. If you go back a few months, there was an expectation that basically all the clusters, all the kind of big kind of questions and working groups on what Ukraine needs to do to join the bloc would be opened this summer. That has not happened. They've only opened 2 out of 6, basically the first one and then the last one, which is about foreign policy, which isn't very controversial. All the really difficult stuff in terms of Ukraine's access to Europe's markets, in terms of fighting corruption, in terms of rule of law, in terms of agriculture, right? The EU budget is still very heavily focused on agriculture. Ukraine has an incredibly well-developed, modern and competitive agricultural sector that's kind of more similar to what you'd see in places like Brazil or the US than to most European countries. And there's a lot of fear from European countries that they'll be out-competed by Ukrainian farmers. So all that difficult stuff has basically been parked. And that obviously means that the ambition to join the bloc in a couple of years looks a lot further away than it might have done earlier in the year. When Ursula von der Leyen was last here for the anniversary of Russia's invasion, she talked of Ukraine being able to join in a matter of years, maybe by 2030. That is now looking increasingly difficult. Obviously, there'd been voices in Europe previously saying that that was a little over-ambitious. But the fact is, lots of things aren't happening here, and lots of Ukrainian activists and kind of anti-corruption analysts are saying the government here, the team around President Zelensky, are not doing enough to fight kind of vested interests and to make Ukraine a kind of more likely candidate for quick membership.
Von der Leyen is also visiting Ukraine during a government reshuffle that has taken some by surprise. The defense minister has been in focus. What's at play here?
Well, we still don't know what his fate looks like. There was a headline just in the last few hours saying that Zelensky had kind of hinted that he still hadn't taken a final decision. This is, I think, seen from most Ukrainians' perspective, the most important post, obviously, in the government in a country at war. prime ministers in a country like Ukraine in a presidential system are more kind of technocratic, but the defense ministry is obviously incredibly important, spending huge budgets on weapons, on making sure that also soldiers get what they need and soldiers' families are supported the way that they need to be. And this current defense minister, Mikhail Fyodorov, he comes from digitalization, from a kind of background of trying to reform Ukraine's government and use digitalization to get over bureaucracy and to make this country more efficient and more able to kind of ward off Russia's aggression. He was seen to do a really good job there, and there's been a lot of positive responses inside the country, but also from European countries dealing with Ukraine about his tenure as Minister of Defense. So there's real kind of big question marks there why he would be moved. There had been some issues with mobilization and kind of pictures that had done the rounds here in Ukraine and worried many, where civilians in Lviv had resisted attempts to recruit people to the military, and that was quite embarrassing for the government. So it's a speculation that that could be the cause, but a real worry here amongst people who say this is the best Minister of Defense that Ukraine's had for a long time. That is a widely held opinion. Someone who is a lot less ad hoc to kind of in hoc rather to the generals and to the kind of vested interests, and who now might be, pushed aside because he's basically made life too difficult for the people who've always been there for the top generals. So that's something that people here in Ukraine are really paying attention to and don't really understand why now.
They're also paying attention to the latest from the front lines. Just bring us up to date there.
So I think the most important thing to take away, if you're just, occasionally paying attention to what's going on here in Ukraine, the front lines are not moving a lot. Russia is really losing steam, is unable to push even kind of as far as it was a couple of months ago because Ukraine's middle strikes are basically stopping their logistics. But we're seeing both sides actually just upping their attacks on the kind of far hinterland on both sides. So we've had a Russian drone attacking a gas station west of Ukraine in places that basically never saw these kind of attacks on trucks on both sides. For now, Ukraine seems to be doing pretty successfully in terms of taking down Russia's ability to make money with oil, forcing Russia to import refined oil from India, say. But certainly it feels like right now the front lines are freezing, and actually the kind of more dangerous stuff is happening far behind the front lines across both countries.
Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Thank you, Nick.